Very good. Well, a big welcome, everybody. Yes, feel free to find any spot that's available. We like to mix things up, so feel free to find folk that you don't know particularly well just yet, and that's obviously a really important part of this experience. So feel free to find any spot that you can see free. A big welcome, everybody. A big hello as well. My name is Chris Morfess. I'm a principal consultant with SpringPoint. I've been a part of our team for about 7 years or so now, and really excited to have the chance to kick things off on what's going to be a really exciting topic to explore with you all today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the original custodians of the land on which we meet and share stories today. We participate in this 65,000 year plus tradition of sharing stories and learning from each other, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging as we get underway today. So, who have we got in the room today? I thought it would be a good opportunity just to quickly provide a representation around the different businesses that we have reflected in the room here. It's always wonderful to see such a terrific mix across our network here, and I know that we've got a really great range of folk from very seasoned L&D practitioners and leadership experts through to budding early career org psychs. So we've got a really great mix of folk in the room today and everything in between. A wonderful range of different industries and sectors in the room here today as well. So we know that a really great part of our Talking Point events is the chance to hear perspectives from different people from different walks of life. So we'll make sure that we spend plenty of time on that today. Okay, so I know that we do have some familiar faces in the room and also some new characters for which this might be the first time you've had a chance to join us at our Talking Point event. So this is a series that we run. We run sort of 3 to 4 a year. We've been running this series for a number of years now, and really the spirit of this is to bring an interesting and topical topic to our network. It's a great chance to bring together our great diverse network into a room. It's a great chance to disconnect from our day-to-day and have a chance just to share some ideas and explore some different ideas, and also just have a chance to re-energise from our typical day-to-day activities. Our intent and our objectives always is to make sure that we're bringing a level of progressive thinking. So this topic around leadership development being broken and needs to and requires a quick fix is something that we're really passionate about, and we know through the participation and the inquiry so far in leading into today that this is a topic that's resonated with a lot of characters. So hopefully we'll be able to share some progressive thoughts on that with you.
Thank you, Chris, for getting our team suitably warmed up. So Chris did introduce me, but I'm Dylan Flavel, and I'm going to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes just getting us a bit familiarised with this topic. I'm sure, as Chris shared, the topic is provocative and has a few layers to it. And I want to share a little bit about our perspectives. As Chris shared, we try to make our Talking Point events progressive and challenging in the thinking that we bring. So we want to sort of lay that foundation before we invite our panel up here to explore it a bit more. And of course, we're going to give you the chance to connect a bit more in your groups and share and perhaps ask some questions of our panel as well. So interesting topic, and today we didn't have to market this topic at all. So I think we sort of booked out, which is the first time ever for this. We normally have to, reach out to our network and let them know this is happening. So it's clearly struck a chord with you all. So what I'd like to do is sort of set the frame for why the topic, and what are our perspectives that sit underneath it, both from research but also from practice. So a few things to share just to get the ball rolling. So what's happening in the world of work right now? I mean, I guess some of this stuff I don't need to share with you. I guess in the last 2 or 3 years, we've held a number of events here talking about change, transformation, leadership, culture, and we have spent a lot of time articulating what's going on. And I think for many of us, it's now pretty familiar. There's a lot happening. Business is changing faster than ever. The biggest element of that and factor in that at the moment that's being spoken about is AI, but it's not the only thing. There's huge social and geopolitical activity going on. So the world is changing quite quickly, and it's just that pace and continuity of it. I have shared with many of my clients, and even just our colleagues thinking about this year. It feels like this year has started at a phenomenal pace. You sort of think you're going to down tools at Christmas time and then come back some point in the new year, maybe in February, and sort of start dusting yourself off. And we absolutely didn't see that within our client base. We saw this frenetic level of activity restart really quite early in January. So the world is changing and continuing to change at pace. And of course, that has implications for the role of leaders in many different ways. So, this increased competition and complexities, changing business models. There's lots of complexity within the workforce around generational shifts and some really big changes and challenges to the way we think about, the workforce, inclusivity, and all of those things. So it's an interesting time, and the role of leader is continuing to evolve and change, and in many ways is also continuing to stay the same. So, it's a really interesting space. What we also know is that investing in leadership, it actually matters. So many organisations are going about trying to create change and growth through different approaches. It might be M&A activity. It might be new or expansion through geography. But we know that organic growth of an organisation through activities like, not just, but like leadership development is a key way of growing your business at a reasonably low level of risk. And you can see up there, for every $1 spent on leadership development done well, organisations can expect a really significant return on investment, like a 7 times return on investment. So it's something that's worth doing. So the world's changing, the role of leaders changing, and leadership development does matter to the growth and sustainability agenda of organisations. So if that is true, if good leadership development is more important than ever, how are we going in developing it? And so this topic could have been about leadership. What is the role of a leader? What is it changing? We could be talking about that, and that's not necessarily what we wanted to focus on today. We know it is, but what we wanted to focus on is how are we doing as a community of professionals in developing leaders well, or as well as we can. And what I'm really cognizant of this morning is, whilst I want to be provocative, I also recognise there's some amazing work being done in this space, of course. I also recognise that I've been part of some work that I think is amazing, and some work at different times over the last 20 years that I go, that didn't work. And so I'm sort of just acknowledging that there's some great stuff happening, but I also think we are at an interesting point, an inflection point, where there's a disruptive opportunity, and I'm wondering if we will be disrupted, or whether we can sort of start to self-agitate around how we do leadership development more, better, and different. So our perspectives on this, so I'm just going to share 3. We could have listed 5, 6, 7, or 8 different angles on this, but just to get your thinking wheels greased a little bit for our panel, I wanted to share a few ideas. So the first one, as a premise for why we might position leadership development to be broken. It's an $80 billion industry, and it's always challenging for me to think about how we really measure that. I'm sure it's actually a lot bigger, but an $80 billion industry. And so then you go, does that weigh up, and are we seeing the outcome of that? I remember the first time I really started thinking about this idea of leadership development being broken. And for those of you who've been in this room and listened to me speak before, there's a guy that I do love to listen to and hear, and his name is Peter Senge. He's a strategist, and he's one of the most influential people both in business and in practice over the last sort of 30 or 40 years in our industry. And his view, quite plainly, was that leadership development is baloney. That was his statement to me when I spent a week with him. And he was saying, of course it's not. I value it deeply, but I don't think it's being done well. And so from that point on, I really started to think deeply about the ideas that he's had, and then to look to gather my own evidence and data and look at the research. A few things up here. If we've got a massive industry, then we look up there, only 10% of corporate leadership investment is estimated to actually deliver concrete business results. That's a HBR piece of research from 18 months ago. 12% of companies have confidence in the strength of their leadership bench. 30% of executives feel they're effectively developing leaders to meet evolving challenges. But then this one's a bit of a zinger, is companies often wait 9 years to give managers access to leadership training. So what we know is between 7 and 9 years is the average wait time in organisations for a first-time people leader, and I'm using that distinction, to get any formal training. So not about whether that investment works, but what are we not doing is one of the challenges there. What are we not doing? And if you're getting to 7 or 9 years before you've had any formalisation of your skills, what does that mean in the sort of the culture and practices that we're building? So a little bit about the state of play. Now, I wanted to share, a few views on why that might be. So we've got a few, but before I get to that, the other things that have provoked me and that I wanted to share briefly is, my first question is, who in here has been Tony Robbins? Put your hand up if you've had any exposure. You don't have to reveal how much, but who has been Tony Robbins? We've got a few and you're shy. I'm putting my hand up, okay? So I've been Tony Robbins. I've been to a couple of his things, out of market research, self-interest, whatever you might want to call it. And I've been to some of the online forums, and some of those were that interesting, really strong foundation in NLP type of stuff. Been around for 30 or 40 years. Whether you love or like what that guy does, you've got to acknowledge a couple of things. The firstly is the scale of what he's doing and trying to do. Whether you agree with how he's doing it, the scale of his work is enormous. The second thing that you would have to acknowledge from his work is his intense focus on how to create transformational change within people quickly. Absolutely his two focuses. Probably his third one is the capacity to make a shitload of money. So he's really focused on those three things. But when you look at that, I can't help but be challenged to go, how do you take some principles of that work into the work that we do? And that's a challenge that I felt personally when I sat through 9 hours of Tony dancing and giving his signature clapping and all that sort of stuff, which was both amusing but interesting at the same time. The second thing for me is that I reckon I've done about 1,000 hours of group facilitation in the last year. And I talked to a couple of people in the room this morning about their same experience of sometimes coming back after being with a group for 6 months and working through some things and challenging myself, going, I'm not sure if I've shifted anything in this room. And then, of course, other moments when you can see great changes happen and you feel just joy at the fact that people are learning and you can see the impact that's happening. But those differences can be quite stark in what you're seeing, and then it makes you challenge both yourself and the work that you're doing. And the third one is gleaned from a few reflections I've had, but this sort of development of large language models, so AI, this idea of having a coach in your pocket is something that's quickly gathering momentum in a whole range of fields, including leadership development, which challenges me to go, if that sort of disruption is coming or possible, it's not so much about is that the future, but it's going, things that haven't been possible are starting to be possible. How are we thinking differently about what we're doing and how we're engaging in this whole practice? So they're three of the things that really sparked my thinking to go, I'd love to talk to our community about this whole topic. This first one, for every $10 spent on senior leaders, only $1 is spent on frontline leaders. And the things that I see in organisations, and I've been part of it, is that we over-curate and we craft unique and bespoke experiences for senior people, which in and of itself is great. It's just the focus that can shift away from us being able to create broad-based leadership within an organisation. The second one is this idea, and as I say, it's quite connected, that there's not enough scale across our workforce. You can see that top one. So, frontline leaders influence up to 80% of the workforce. Yet in the public sector, they receive only 20% of the leadership development budget. And while 83% of organisations believe it's important to develop leaders at every level, only 5% of businesses have implemented that. And I often see it too. We start at the top and we go, okay, we're going to do this work and we're going to cover the whole organisation. And then for some reason, the world changes, and because of that cycle time of organisations now, we get delayed, or there's a new CEO, or something happens, and we don't get down the bottom. So we've got this top-down piece of work, and we don't get down to the bottom to those who are really touching our customers, which challenges me to go, this whole idea that we've had and we've been working towards of top-down leadership development, as in let's start at the top and get senior leaders on board because we think that's how change works. Then I go, really? Is that really right? And I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that can be an element that's important, but isn't actually a principle that we need to apply universally. So there's a really interesting thing there. And I guess what is the kicker in this is this idea of how do you create behavioural norms or tipping points in organisation that develop leadership as a cultural competence as opposed to a capability for some. They're quite different. And I think Chris did a good job of talking about our work tends to be about how do we create scaled behavioural change. And in leadership, that seems like one of the most important things to be focused on. The last one is this idea of just too much theory and not enough practice. And I know I've got some of my wonderful WorkSafe colleagues here, and I know they'll have heard this sort of share that I've had, but it's not a new one. But if any of your kids have gone to swimming practice in the last, or the swimming week that tends to happen at various points in the year, actually, not necessarily summer, so I've learned out. But if your child goes for their week of swimming at school, they don't have them sitting down reading a book on how to swim. Yeah? And if they did, I would question any of its relevance when you threw them in the pool to do something. And the same applies here for leadership development. We're talking about a similarly dynamic and adaptive thing that requires multiple parts to get it right, and you have to interact with the environment. And this focus that we have had traditionally on leadership development being in classrooms is one that is very hard for us to pull away from. And I would say in my 25, 30 years of doing work in this space, I've only had a couple of clients who've been really willing to say, let's totally reverse it. Let's reverse it. Let's throw our theory out the window and let's just do leadership development in practice. Let's do it live and let's apply some bits of theory at the back end. And the challenge being that it's challenging and it can create difficult experiences rather than great experiences or curated experience. It can have leaders leave a room feeling that things didn't work or that they were clunky. And that's a very different experience to some of the other things. But actually, that is the life of leading. And so this challenge for us as professionals, which it won't be new for anyone in the room, but how do you truly start to put practice before theory or get a much better integration is a real challenge. Thank you, Drew. You can take a seat. I'm going to do my best job of introducing you. Now, Drew has spent a significant amount of his career in the Navy in a range of roles, but then left the Navy for a good part of 20 years, and he's worked in some of the biggest, brightest and best organisations in corporate Australia, so has a really great background, but then went back to the Navy. And now the roles he's been in have been many and varied, but broadly span org effectiveness, change, transformation and learning, and a bunch of other things too. So brings amazing experience from very different industry sectors. And I'll be really interested in also the transition of going, Navy back to corporate, then back into Navy again. So thank you so much for being part of our panel this morning, Drew. Secondly, I'd like to invite Luke Darcy to come up. Thank you, Luke. Round of applause for Luke. Hello, mate. Welcome. Thank you. So I've known Luke for the best part of 30 years now, but more recently came back in contact with Luke in the last 5 or 10 years as Luke's really started to develop a real passion in this space. Some of you will know Luke, you'll have seen him on TV, but clearly Luke had a terrific career in elite sport, with the Western Bulldogs, where he did a number of things beyond just playing leadership roles in that team, but then went on to a really successful media career, which only finished and put maybe a temporary or a permanent full stop to that on grand final day last year. And Luke is now really connected and committed to this broad topic really through a Leader Connect, which is an organisation that he's a co-founder and leader of, and I'm sure Luke will share more about that today. So thank you both, Luke and Drew, for being part of our panel and team today. And I'm going to ask Mel to come up. Round of applause for Mel as well. We gave Mel a A little intro before. I'm not going to go too deep here, but Mel leads our transformation practice, and she'll both chair our little panel up here, but she'll also share some of her experiences leading transformation. She's deeply involved in leadership development in a particularly practical and applied way. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Mel. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan, and thanks, Drew and Luke, for joining us up here. Look, I think we'll probably just start, perhaps just at a personal level. I mean, I think we're all quite interested to hear a little bit about your respective leadership journeys, and particularly, I guess, any memorable personal learning experiences that you've had along the way. So maybe we'll start with you, Drew.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mel. Look, it has been a bit of a varied career for me, I must admit. I grew up in Melbourne, but I went to university up in Armidale up in New South Wales, but in my last year I decided to join the Navy. The reason why, I'm not too sure. I think I saw some fine-looking young sub-lieutenant sort of walking along in his uniform. I thought, gee, that looks good, I might give that a crack. But I did end up joining in my last year of universities and into the Navy as what's called a midshipman, which is the lowest level of officer, commissioned officer. And I did my training and whatnot, and I went through, unfortunately I got very seasick when I went to sea for the first time. So I thought, being a naval officer is maybe probably the best idea, but I thought Horatio Nelson could do it, so why not? A great leader, so I thought I'd give it a crack as well. So I continued through as a logistics officer for several years, and then it was a short service commission of 9 years in those days, and I got out. I was lucky enough to be offered a job at KPMG, sort of in my late 20s, and moved back to Melbourne. And enjoyed some great jobs through KPMG, looking at efficiency, organisational design, costing, pricing, and I worked through the banks. I met Mel at Australia Post when we were working there, when I was one of the senior finance leaders there, and also did some freelancing as well, working with big companies like Telstra and other large corporates around Melbourne. I was at my 30-year reunion and I got tapped on the shoulder and asked, hey Drew, what are you doing these days? And I sort of gave a bit of a synopsis of what I'd been doing, and my colleague who I joined up with those 30 years before said, would you be interested in coming back, big fella? And I said, well, I don't know whether I want to come back as a lieutenant. I got out as a lieutenant, which is a junior officer. After all that experience, I said, would you come back as a commander? And I said, gee, that sounds pretty good, you know. James Bond was a commander, Commander Bond. So I thought that was pretty good. So I thought, I wouldn't mind that. And he said, look, your background, your corporate background, this fact that you speak both languages, the corporate, civilian and military, could be a benefit and whatnot. And I sort of went back into the Navy, like within a month or so as a commander, and started doing a lot of efficiency work, activity-based management work, etc. But going to sea and helping people do that at sea and ashore on our major fleet units. And but more recently I headed up sort of the organisational design part of with Navy, worked in ERP, etc. And I retired recently, but I'm still doing reserve days. I'm an active reservist, and I'm working at HMS Cerberus these days doing organisational design for our training function. So hopefully some of the insights I can give you today might... I'm not a great warrior, don't expect stories of me jumping off the forecastle in the Arabian Gulf with a knife in my mouth attacking submarines. It's not going to be like that, but some more passive type experience I'd like to share with you today around leadership. So there you go.
Great. Thanks, Drew. Obviously, you've just described a fabulous career there of starting in the Navy, going into corporate. Obviously, you've also crossed sectors. You've gone into finance, you're now in org design and sort of workforce and training as well. And I know, you've had several leadership roles across that varied career. What would you describe as a couple of your sort of, I guess, deepest, almost memorable learning experiences from that?
Look, I found that, I'll be honest with you, the major learning experiences, or the ones that impacted me the most, was when I was a junior officer.
Yeah.
I must admit, because you tend to, as a kid, you don't, even though your parents and at school, your sporting teams, you see leadership. But it wasn't until I was sitting on a ship and I was responsible for people that I was starting to find that I needed to, and you're only 20, 21, 22 years old at this stage, and you don't have a lot of experience in this stuff, but you're responsible for a group of sailors. that may be, maybe older than you, for instance, and that you have to sort of grow up pretty quickly. But one thing that really, one moment that really exemplified how leadership worked. Probably, I was on at sea on a ship called HMS Stalwart, big 17,000 tonne, I think it was. And there was the morale on the ship wasn't great in all the messes, or when I say the messes, where the sailors lived and they ate and whatnot. And bad morale at sea is extremely bad, right? Because it affects output, safety, all sorts of things, right? Okay, behaviour, bad behaviour. So what it was, I saw one of the messes. There was a junior sailors mess, and I was a logistics officer, so we looked after the logistics branch of sailors. And one young leading seaman, which is like a corporal in the army, sort of a junior sailor, maybe 5 to 10 years experience, got up and said, "This isn't any good anymore." Just a young fella, same age as me, in this mess. And this mess would have had perhaps 100 people in it. Oh, maybe not that many, maybe 60, I'll say. And the chefs, storemen, stewards, victuallers, these sorts of people. And what it was, he came in and said, "I'm going to lead this mess." And he used his own initiative and said, "I'm going to be the mess president." So then he started to go around to everyone and talking to them, seeing where they were from, who they were, communicating with them, being interested in them, what they wanted, how they were. And what happened, then they started to slowly pull together, right? And then what they do, he then started to organise functions on the ship, off the ship, when we'd come alongside in maybe Singapore or somewhere like that. And he would get that bunch of people together, not all of them, but he would invite them all. Different backgrounds, different personalities, different types of people. He'd pull them together, right? Now, this went on for a little while I was on board the ship, and you could see the cohesion happening and the morale within this mess just increasing before your eyes. Like they would have sort of, you can't party and drink all the time or anything like that, but what you can do at sea, you can sort of party, but at nights you'd walk in there and they'd have coloured lights going, at the end of, not all the time because people are doing shift work and whatnot, but when it allowed, they'd have coloured lights everywhere and music going and things like that when they could. Also, and what would happen, all the other messes saw this, and it started to permeate out amongst the other messes, the communications mess, the bosun's mess, the different messes, and they wanted to be the same because they saw the great time that these people were having. So that really struck me as someone that could take just one person taking the initiative, being inclusive, having great communication and achieving an outcome that had an impact on the rest of the ship in the end. A young fella, 21 years old. So that's something that really impacted me.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. And I think I can really sort of associate that if I think about transformation, organisational transformation and business transformation. I know for many years I really thought about transformation in, how do you drive change across an organisation? And that's around sort of the goal or vision around transformation and strategic clarity around where you're going and, ensuring people understand that. But I think to your point, what's become more apparent to me, particularly over the last sort of, say even 5 to 10 years, has much more been around the connection of people and how do you influence and how do you drive change around drawing purpose and connection to the change you're trying to get to or the outcome you're trying to get to. So how do you bring the sort of hard dynamic and softer dynamic of change or vision or strategy or execution or the discipline that we're talking about. So I'm certainly seeing that, and I think that's probably been a bit of an eye-opener for me over more recent years as well.
And if I could just quickly add to that there, Mel, you notice it was a junior sailor that did it, wasn't the commanding officer, right? Even though, so there's leadership at all levels. The commanding officer is an excellent commanding officer, but it was at that level. So leadership is at all levels.
Yeah.
So
Great. Thanks, Drew. Luke, what about yourself? Let's hear it.
Yeah, great story, Drew. I subscribe to that too. We're really passionate about you can be first person, first day in work, and you can change an organisation by the impact you have on others. And I love that story and resonate coming out of the professional sporting world is something I wanted to do from the age of 5, and then you walk into these full-time sports organisations and you feel like every week it's like an AGM. Every time you play, round 1 of the AFL season kicked off and we want to sack half the coaches last week because they lost. want to build statues for the other half who won this week. And so you get the feedback loop in professional sport is really, really quick. And so as a 7 and 18-year-old walking into that environment, you sort of got struck by what good leadership looked like and what poor leadership looked like pretty quickly. And you were starting to try and work that out. People that had an impact like that young sailor you were talking about, who could change your life if they were... and to me, sometimes we talk this complex language about leadership, but I think it's actually a lot more simple than that. People who make you feel good, who include you, who want you to be a better version of yourself, well, that's really great leadership. And I think sometimes you've got to see, Paulie, I share this story sometimes because they're the war stories we tell. Some of the coaching in our era was quite bizarre and quite brutal. And in my third ever game, I was playing at the old Waverley ground. You know that, Drew, as an old St Kilda supporter. And we're playing against Hawthorn. I apologise for the people in the room, AFL aficionados, but Hawthorn were this champion team in my era. I was a skinny 18-year-old kid playing on a guy called Chris Langford that maybe some of you won't recognise, but I grew up sort of idolising this guy. He looked a bit like Superman. He was an extraordinary athlete. He was a champion junior 800-metre runner. I was a really underdeveloped 18-year-old trying to see if I could compete on the field, and I was going terribly. And you know when you're going terribly. Every time the ball came to the two of us, he'd literally just put one hand on me, push me aside, grab the ball, and they would kick a goal. And you know that the runner is coming out your way. You can feel it, and you're trying to pretend it's not happening. And we had a runner in that era, Mel. His name was Chris Burton, and he had this style of adding to the coach's worst message. He'd add his own 20% on top of it. And so I can see him coming my way, and instead of sort of sidling up alongside Drew and whispering in my ear and giving me a bit of feedback, he yelled out, "The coach thinks you're playing the worst game in VFL AFL history." And my opponent, Chris Langford, starts pissing himself laughing next to me, which was sort of fairly confident sapping. And he said, that's not the funny part. This is him yelling out. The funny part is he's going to leave you out here because he doesn't think it's possible to play any worse. So you can imagine how your confidence felt at that moment in time in your third ever AFL game. And I transport us to 2025, Mel. We get to work with AFL coaches now who just are like the young sailor Drew described. They have empathy. They have care for the people in their environment. We probably all worked out that wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
Didn't really. And you either cope with it, Mel, or you got sacked. That was our era. And look at a Craig McRae, coaches Collingwood now, the care. He uses the word love in his environment. He loves his players. If I could share one other quick story on one of my favourite things that happened last year, it's another AFL story. He was in one of our leader programs, and he was sharing before Anzac Days, 100,000 people at the MCG. So it's a pretty pressure-packed day. Collingwood S, and one of my favourite days of the year in the world of football, outside of grand final day. And he said to his players, someone's going to have a horror moment. It just happens. Yeah. I promise you, you're going to have a horror moment, but I want you to be like a goldfish. What does a goldfish do? 5 seconds later, it forgets and it moves on. So just park the mistake, and that's how we're going to play. So Julie in the first quarter, one of the great players, is at fullback, 100,000 people in the MCG. He goes to kick the ball out of fullback, stubs his toe on the grass, the ball rolls to his opponent, picks it up, kicks it over his head for a goal. You can't have a bigger clanger in AFL football than that moment. Now, we're in the commentary box, you pan to the coach. Craig McRae is pissing himself laughing, the coach. Now, the era I played in, the coach would have put his fist through the wall, screamed at the runner, "Get that idiot off." Now, was that helpful or not helpful? And so you can only works if you live that behaviour. And, Braden Maynard at half-time went up to the coach and said, "What am I, coach?" Who'd forgotten about his pre-time speech and said, "I'm a goldfish, aren't I?" Yeah. So leadership doesn't have to be complex, but you've got to live what you say, and I love seeing it in action.
Thanks very much, Luke. That's a great story, and I just love the contrast that you're describing there as well around sort of the, I guess, evolution of leadership and what good leadership has been either on the field or off the field as well. I mean, the next question that I've got here, it sort of is leading on from where we're just talking now, but you have both have worked in really, I guess, high pressure or high stakes environments. And I'm just interested to hear a little bit about what good leadership looks like in those situations. Maybe start with you. Yeah, Drew.
Look, I must admit, I haven't seen a lot of because I got out for so long, I haven't seen a lot of operational stuff, but one of the few times that I did see was involved in an operational matter at sea was back in the late 80s, and we were heading up the sort of north, sort of the east coast of Queensland there, and I was looking forward to 3 days in Cairns, I've got to say, on the weekend, and but I got up in the morning, I noticed that the ship, right, when I got up, I looked up and the sun was in, sailors do this, mariners do this, they look at the sun, they go, hold on, we're heading in the wrong direction. Cairns is over that way, we're heading east. And then all of a sudden over the piping system is like the PA system on a ship. They said, the commanding officer came on, this commanding officer speaking. The Prime Minister of Australia has directed us to head to a particular island in the Pacific Ocean. There's been an issue there, and we need to extract Australian citizens and New Zealanders and UK and American citizens from this particular place. So I'm sitting there going, hold on, what, us? Like as in, I'm not sure, I've never done this before. This is something which was very new. So what it was, this was during the Great Peace, so a lot hadn't happened since Vietnam. We were basically doing diplomatic missions up in Southeast Asia and dealing with these people, a lot of countries up that, from a relationship perspective, diplomatic perspective. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, we may have to pick up weapons and go and get people. Because we didn't have the army with us. Australia don't have Marines or anything like that, so it was a bunch of sailors on the ship. So we were heading over that way. Now, what it was, we were briefed. You're going to have boarding parties. You junior officer there, you're going to have to grab this bunch of sailors here, stick a helmet on, grab a rifle, and go ashore and get these people out. And we're talking some pretty big people that we were going to come up against, pretty angry people. And so what the CO had to do, he had to then prepare us for that, right? Okay, we were in the Navy, we signed up for this sort of stuff, but still it was unfamiliar to us. So what did he do? Firstly, what he had to do, he had to make sure that the mission was communicated in an extremely important way, that we felt that we were doing something important, which we were. Those people, those Australians that were sitting on that particular island, didn't even know we were there and we were coming for them if we needed to, right? That was the first thing. It was the mission, and he communicated that. Right. Secondly, it was making sure that there was a consistent message through all levels: commanding officer, executive officer, heads of department, junior officers, senior sailors, junior sailors, whoever was involved, and everyone was involved, right? Whether you were going ashore or not, right? Because not everyone could go ashore, obviously. Thirdly, we had to make sure at each one of those levels that everyone was communicated to exactly what they needed to do in line with the training that they had done, right? And that was consistent across all teams. They knew what the mission was, what they had to go in and do, and then get out, okay? And that was the third thing, the major things. And that showed that level of leadership from the top level, right, that level, what the mission was, how it was communicated, everything was consistent, everyone relied on their training and knew exactly what they had to do when they got there, when they got our citizens, and then got off the island, okay? Notwithstanding that, thank goodness, things quietened down and we didn't have to do it. But we were ready to go and we were happy to go. And that was all due to the leadership at the top, making us feel important, the reason why we were there, and the fact that we were doing really good for our fellow Australian citizens. Okay, so they're the sort of things. So I thought that showed great leadership in a time when people could have got killed. Okay? All right, so that was,
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I mean, obviously very relevant to the situation you're describing there, but also really relevant to any situation, isn't it? I mean, you can apply that, sort of practical things around, communication, role clarity, the purpose, all of those things really apply. Training, certainly apply to other circumstances as well. What about yourself, Luke?
Well, Mel, I think the patterns that we see, consistently again, and to simplify it, is just when people genuinely care, you can get them to do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
That's a challenging situation Drew's just described. I had the pleasure of sitting with a guy called Paul Barnes last week and recording a podcast who's the head of logistics for McLaren Racing, and their season started on the weekend here in Melbourne, and they travel every week. They're now in China as of today, unpacking that car, packing it up, and Bahrain the week after, all the way through to December. So if you work in that industry, you're away from your family from now until December every single week. There's a 2-week break in the middle of the year. And he was referencing Andrea, their team boss at McLaren Formula One, the former Ferrari manager, and he spoke about him in these revered terms because Andrea might touch 1,000 people with the McLaren organisation, but if he walked past Mel, he'd know your kid's name, he'd know your partner's name, he'd ask how Billy's going at school in year 6, and it might be a touch point of just that 10 seconds, or a bunch of flowers turn up for everyone's partners at the start of the Formula One season, just to say thank you for the effort that we're going to have in taking your partner away. And to me, you can't fake the time you put in, you can't fake actually caring, and people get it. People understand if you're dialing it in or you're not. And then when you are authentic and you genuinely care, you can ask people to do extraordinary things. Grab a gun and get off a boat and help us save people on an island. If you haven't got that level of care, and that's what we see great leaders do, and then you can have a hard conversation because you've got equity, and you can say, hey, we need to chat to you now because things are struggling. What's happening at the moment? What's happening on the home front? You're not performing the way we need to. That feedback conversation becomes much easier if you've invested in the person. So that's where we see great leaders. They consistently, genuinely care about the people that are around them.
Yeah, and interesting, I think you're just obviously describing that sort of shift, you know, as you spoke about before in your early career, as in your footy career, to what you sort of see in coaches now is that sort of shift to empathy and care and connection and, you know, those, I guess, really important attributes.
And I think, Mel, people then confuse that with everyone wins a prize.
Yeah,
it's okay, great, what a woke world we live in. You can have the most direct conversation with people, and that happens in sport. The feedback part of that happens in all the organisations of people. Like, you need to do that, but you can't have that successfully if you haven't put the time in previously. And I think that's the point of difference. You know, I love the topic today, is leadership broken? I think some leaders are broken because they haven't learned the right way. You know, I worked in an organisation where a senior leader carried a samurai sword around the office and used to slam it on the desk. Now, you know, without naming names, people might even know who I'm talking about. That created 30 years of people who fell into leadership roles who still think that's, you know, this guy read The Art of War. It's crazy, you know. And it's sort of comical, but it tragically affects people's lives in a horrific way. People have got, you know, still talk about the stress of that organisation, but the sad part is there's still people think that's the way to lead.
Yeah.
That's what's broken. So when you see great behaviour and great people come through, that changes organisations for the next 30 years the other way. So when you put leaders in those roles who don't get invested in, who carry on poor behaviour, that is a tragedy for people who go to work every single day.
Yeah, great reflection. Thank you very much, Luke. Now, you're both, I mean, you're leading your own organisation at the moment, Luke, with a leader, and we're keen to, or I'm certainly keen to hear a little bit more about that shortly. And Drew, you're obviously working in an organisation at the moment, so you're both seeing firsthand around how leaders are being developed or how leadership development is done at the moment. And we obviously just heard from Dylan before talking about some of the things that we're probably seeing as well. I guess from your perspective, what is broken for you at the moment? What are you seeing in practice that you think could be improved or is not necessarily creating the impact that it should or could?
It's a good question. Look, I don't know whether broken is the right word to use. You know, there's always room for improvement, being an improvement and efficiency improvement expert.
And the glass half full
right.
guy.
That's why you say broken, people get a bit worried about that. Look, things can always be improved. And what I'm experiencing at the moment and seeing, and because I've been around for a while, you see change over time. It's the attitudes of the people that we're actually dealing with are changing. And Luke, I'm sure you've seen this yourself. Not as old as me, but I'm sure you've seen it yourself. The kids that we're getting through these days, they have different expectations. When I joined up, my parents and my uncles, you know, they were, you know, World War II type. You know, the attitude towards duty and country and honour and things, you know, that it was a lot easier to lead those sorts of people because their values were different. The values of people these days are very different. I was actually having this very conversation with one of the guests here today earlier on. It's all about about this thing here, all your news, all your information, and you can't be parted from this. So you remember imagine trying to get people and motivate people to join the Navy for a start as submariners, when you can't even and anything, you can't use these. People think, oh my God, how can I survive if I can't use my phone, if I can't do a TikTok video? So these are the sort of things. So what's happening is it's not so much that leadership has reduced in its ability to impact. What it is, it's our ability to change with the environment that we're in. So you have to be quite agile in the way that we now manage and lead our resources, right? And resources isn't only people, it's also assets, software, technology. So it can be that as well. So I think the biggest challenge is your agility to be able to amend your leadership style to adapt to the resources that you're given and their expectations from a personnel perspective. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Drew. Luke?
Yeah, we started our Space Mill in education. A brief version of that, if I can, for a couple of minutes. One of my oldest friends I grew up with as a 12-year-old, and we both had this dream of playing AFL footy. He fractured his ankle badly in our last game together and became a legendary educator, is what I described my great friend Matt Waterwitz as. And they were booting out 25 kids in year 10 at his school in the McLaren Vale of South Australia. And if you know Matt, he's just one of those people. Went to the principal and said, why are we doing that? I became a teacher exactly for this moment. And the principal sort of looked at him strangely, what do you want to do? And he said, well, can I have these kids in my care? Let me run this program. And it was, of course, he was making it up. And he said, can I get one other teacher, but I want to have a say in the curriculum. And so I remember talking to him, around that week, and we'd stayed in touch, great friends, and he was like, shit, I don't know what I'm going to do now, but he got them to meet. I love this story, at a place called Somerton Beach, about 10 minutes out of Adelaide. And he remembered as a kid, there was a body had washed up on Somerton Beach 10 minutes out of the CBD of Adelaide in the 1950s. The body had been surgically scrubbed, the clothing tags had been cut off, there was some strange sort of Russian-style tattoo on the body, and the one sort of clue was a bit of Persian writing in a diary in the pocket of a jacket that was on this body. And there was an old detective that he'd heard of who was obsessed with this case, who thought a Russian spy had watched up on Somerton Beach. So he gets these 25 kids to meet him at this beach, and he says, hey, we're going to do a lot of things this year, but we're going to try and solve this cold case murder. Now, all the kids suddenly, their eyes have lit up, the detective's sort of telling them the case, and they started writing to the editor, the advertiser, the local paper, demanding the case be reopened. That body actually got exhumed 6 years ago in no small part because these kids had this passion for it. It's a great story now. It's a Somerton man story. Cutting to the chase, every one of these kids went from being kicked out of school in year 10. Every one of them finished year 12. 80% of them went on and did tertiary education. And my friend just said to the principal, hey, I'm not handing these kids back to the system unless you let me coach our teachers on how to connect with the kids better. There is nothing wrong with these kids. We've let them down. We haven't engaged them in a way. Now, to me, I just fell in love with that as a father of 4. That's a life-changing moment for 25 kids. Now, in education, it's confronting for a lot of teachers to have to collaborate on how to be better. It's confronting to have to think about your own practice. Oh, hang on, I've got a job for life because it's heavily unionised. Do I have to get some feedback on the fact that, little Billy's about to be booted out of the school? How important is that? And yet there was a real reluctance to it. And so that was an example of how important it is when people take a stand. And Matt wasn't the principal. He wasn't the senior leader. He just cared. He just said, I'm in for this conversation. And so, several thousand educators we've been able to meld through that space, share around how to connect with kids better. And it's not complex. It wasn't hard. He didn't rewrite curriculum. He just cared a bit more for those kids than they had been before, but he needed other people to care. So I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, Mel, but I think sometimes I read the leadership language and I get confused by it. It's too complex. It sounds too hard. I think it's actually a lot more simple than that. I think you can break it down, and then you want to mimic that behaviour. You want to get more Matt Waterwitzes and you want to see more of them around, and you want to copy that, and you want to share that in the context, whether it's an education setting, whether it's the great work that I know you guys do, Mel, and your organisation, or what Drew's done in the Navy. It's contextual, but the patterns are there.
So really, I guess what you're describing there, Luke, is quite transformative leadership, but also, I guess, having the courage to do that, particularly when you're not the principal or you're not a senior teacher or you're not a senior role in an organisation. What do you think's getting in the way at the moment? You know, what gets in the way of other leaders doing that? So that's a great example, and you've spoke about some really good examples. We've all got examples of that. What do you think gets in the way of more of that sort of collective approach to that type of leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mel, and I haven't got a succinct answer to it, because there are, like, I am glass half full. I think I'm in the Drew. I see great people doing great things, and I don't think we share enough in forums like this. So, you know, it's rapt to be here, because in the world we're seeing now, I could sit here and tell you another 200 stories of great people, but the news cycle is Donald Trump every time you turn your phone on, or some horrific example of what's happening in leadership. And I think what we're doing here today, you guys showing up to start your day and maybe take one bit of that back to your world, and you can transform your place today by just having an impact on the person at the desk next to you. Don't have to wait for a 6-month leadership development course to have that impact. You can choose to do that today, and you know, what I find is sad when we don't let hierarchy gets in the way, Mel, and that's a challenge where, you know, you get an old school boss with a corner office who says this is the way leadership is, and they don't give the freedom for someone to come in with that beautiful exuberance like Matt did at his school. So I think poor leaders are getting in the way. We've got to celebrate great leaders, and there's enough of them out there.
Yeah, we've been working with a client over the last 12 months, actually, really interesting manufacturing, so largely blue collar and say 2/3 blue collar, 1/3 white collar. We did some strategy work with them, we did some culture work with them, and you know, through those discussions, what was emerging was the need to invest in leaders. So they hadn't invested in their leaders for a very long time, and acknowledged the sort of pitfall or the downside of that. And you know, in many ways, it speaks to the statistics that Dylan shared before. And you know, the conversation started with that client very much around, okay, well, let's work with the executive team, and then we'll work with the senior leaders, and we want, you know, because we haven't invested, let's make this a great experience. We want it to be really different. Anyway, where this ended was, for the first time in 100 years, they closed the entire organisation and brought the whole organisation together. You know, we spoke and really focused in that day around value-based leadership, about decision-making, and why that was important is, you know, as most frontline leaders, you've got the biggest influence over the workforce. So they're there making decisions around the customer, around the quality, you know, and decisions that they're making are either impacting customer outcomes, but also having ramifications for themselves in terms of productivity goes down, or spoilage and quality, you know, metrics that they're all measured on. You know, there's an incentive perhaps to not be making or making decisions around those things. And I guess what we saw there was just an openness of that CEO to sort of step aside and go, it's not just our senior leaders that are influencing or are leading this organisation, but our frontline people play just such a critical role in the outcomes of the organisation. And you know, the sort of ongoing feedback with this client has been that has been so transformative by virtue of the fact that, you know, just the symbol of closing the whole organisation down, acknowledging that leadership happens across every level. And we just saw these brilliant people come up and through that day and beyond. We're continuing to work with them at the moment around natural leaders that perhaps just, you know, have been bound by hierarchy, but just haven't necessarily been given the invitation or openness to sort of step up and out in their role.
It's a great point. I just worked for Channel 7 for the last 13 years, and you turn up at the game and there might be a team of 60 working on a game, and if you go and talk to a cameraman, they know television upside down, inside out, back to front. They've got 100 brilliant ideas on how to improve the coverage, an idea for a show. They're some of the most dialed. No one asks them their opinion because you're just holding the camera. You go into makeup or wardrobe, they know television upside down, back to front. They know who's great on air. They know who works well on a team. Do you think anyone ever asked them their thoughts on the environment and how it could get better. You've got a leadership team of 5 people sitting in a state. Most of them actually wouldn't even understand the rules of the game that they've paid $800 million to broadcast, but they're the holders of all knowledge. And so what do you get? Exactly the same thing, because you become this bubble of the same thought, and you're not listening to the security guard on the door who's been there for 25 years, Mel, who's a great guy. He knows more about TV than people who've been in the industry for 25 years. So you're right. Opening that conversation, and then even just giving people a voice. You're actually saying we care about you in the same way, and maybe you get, the block came out of Channel 9, came out of a contest that someone started in the cafe. I'll get it slightly wrong, but they basically, we're going to give someone a prize if they come up with a TV idea. Guy sitting in the cafeteria came up with the block. Most successful television program in Australian history. Makes money every year. Finally, someone asked someone in that 1,000-person organisation for an idea, and guess what? You got one of the best ever.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Luke. Drew, what leadership development have you seen create the greatest impact in the Navy? Like, you've obviously witnessed and been part of several, different approaches. What have you seen create the greatest impact?
What can I say then, Mel? It wasn't in the Navy.
Wasn't in the Navy,
and
okay.
you experienced this with me at Australia Post. We had probably the best leader, he was my manager, that I ever had was at Australia Post. He was the controller there. And what he did, he implemented an emotional intelligence program where we were surveyed. And, I don't think it was necessarily cheap, and I'm not saying that you should always spend a lot. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of resources to do this. But what it allowed, it allowed great exposure to the whole understanding of how you interacted with your fellow employees, staff, leaders, and teams. And not only that, your family as well. We had a PhD chap come in with and run this course over several weeks. But what it gave, and this is I find a particular essential element to being a good leader. It's your understanding of people, right, and why they are motivated to do things. Because part of leadership is being able to motivate a team to do what you're doing, as I gave that example potentially before when we had to jump on that island in the Pacific. To motivate people to do things that they may not want to have to do. So you've got to understand them. You've got to understand their motivations, and having a good understanding of emotional intelligence and being able to look beyond just the front of them and see, well, what is it that motivates this person? Why are they angry today? Why are they happy today? How can I work on that happiness and make everyone happy? And build on things, positive things, and maybe get away from the negative things. And I think emotional intelligence understanding is extremely important with that. You don't necessarily need to do the program that we did, because I think it was quite expensive, but there's things on YouTube and whatnot. There are lots of resources you can get and get an understanding. I remember seeing an ad once, I think it was on depression or something, so the person at the checkout wasn't particularly efficient at a supermarket. They were sad sack on what it is. It's like, the person going through was getting angry with them for making mistakes and things like this, and then the message from the ad was, you just don't know what this person's going through, and after that, it sort of took them back to, going to their mother who was dying of cancer and looking after them, and that was their life. They were just trying to make enough money to be able to look after their mother. So, the reason that they were behaving the way they were in front of customers was because of some issues that you didn't know about. So being able to understand people behind that is and what motivates them and how to bring them out of a hole is extremely important. And that's one thing that first example I gave in the supply mess, the logistics mess on Port HMO Store, similar sort of thing. He went up to those people and he what motivates people? He brought them along for the ride. But I thought that was the best program I've probably ever done there. Apart from obviously my basic training as a midshipman at the Naval College. But that was a really good one,
Thanks,
I think.
Drew. There's certainly a very strong theme in all of the discussion that we're having. Luke, tell us a little bit more about a leader. You're obviously thinking about leadership development in a really unique way. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there and what you're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. We morphed from that education start up, and we just organically we were planning on teaching teachers really and we did for 5 or 6 years, and still do. We still run programs in education, and then we would have a mum would have a daughter in our school and say, hey, will you come and have a look at our 24-hour bottling plan? And we organically sort of got asked to come and look at different organisations. And that idea we're a bit obsessed with this idea of collaborative leadership and role modelling what great leadership looks like. I think it's an underutilised thing of celebrating what's going well. You know, everyone in the room's doing something really well. We missed that opportunity to do it. And so we've, out of the COVID era where a lot of people would have been in the same space, we felt like we'd worked with these great leaders in their own space, but we couldn't get to them because of everything being shut down. And so we formed these collaborative forums of 5 or 6 people. We started with some of the high-profile sporting people we worked with. Justin Langer was the Australian cricket coach. John Worsfold and Ben Rutten were AFL coaches about to do a handover at Essendon, and a guy called Trent Robinson from the Sydney Roosters. And we put them together, and we just, in a trusted environment where they could talk openly and they were non-competing, just the shared learning that was going on blew us away, and realised how lonely leadership is at times. You're in these roles where there aren't many spaces you can go to. You know, you go home and there's a bias, even though it's positive often from your family, or you're border biased in a certain way. And they really just started sharing, Mel, hey, this would be great for a friend of mine. Ange Postecoglou still is the coach of Tottenham. Hope he still is. He's under the pump at the moment. And that community just started sharing it. And we thought maybe it's the sporting people who are quite feedback driven, but they gave us the feedback, hey, I spend my life in sport. I'd love to talk to Drew from the Navy. I'd love to talk from Mel, who does brilliant work as an org psych. And we've been able to take it to conductors of orchestras, and Umar Omar, who founded Safari Doctors, this beautiful Nigerian-born legend who's Harvard educated but transforming medical research in Africa to the Formula One world. And when you put a head of logistics with Formula One, with the founder of Safari Doctors, you go, that doesn't make a lot of sense, except there's a huge amount of logistics in trying to get to people in Africa. It's like the Royal Flying Doctors of Africa. And Umra's become obsessed with McLaren Formula One, and we see these great collaborations, and you put inspiring people together, amazing things happen. And that's sort of our community now. You know, the world is smaller now. You can get on a Zoom and we can put you with a high performance legend at the Milwaukee Bucks. You know, if I could share one story that a guy called Dr. Troy Flanagan is the head of high performance. Milwaukee, as it turns out, has got the highest obesity rate in America, and you can imagine what that looks like if you understand the health outcomes in America at the moment. He is in a group with a beautiful lady called Vanessa Ford, who created a cartoon called Super Sema, where the hero is a black woman with an afro. If you know Vanessa Ford, she's this beautiful Jamaican-born, incredibly creative person. She's backed by the Williams sisters and Oprah Winfrey. This cartoon has gone viral in Europe around finally having a black woman on screen, and her superpowers are science and technology. So she's collaborating with an aerospace engineer at an NBA team. He's going, shit, I've got to be better. How do I'm making high-paid athletes richer. I get paid really well, but so he started an obesity clinic in Milwaukee on the back of being inspired by Vanessa Ford, and they've opened 30 obesity clinics around America. So we think, Mel, getting great people together is a really good thing, and when you see that collaboration happen in real time, it's something we're really, really passionate about.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see why. Thank you very much, Luke. Now, I know I'm really conscious of time, but I'm just going to quickly just ask one very, very quick question. You've got 30 to 60 seconds to answer it. If you had one day and little or no budget, and you've got 20 leaders, what would you do?
This has happened twice to me. I would sit them down in a room with a television and get them to watch 12 O'Clock High, the movie. It's with Gregory Peck. It's about a B-17 squadron in World War II, and it just hits on discipline, leadership, outcomes, motivation. It's fantastic. So, that's happened to me twice. Is when I was in cadets at school, and also when I was a junior officer under training, and they used that movie. And those can be very powerful because I've remembered it and I bought the movie myself. So there we go.
I love it, and also very scalable, very cheap,
Absolutely.
very scalable. That's
Absolutely.
not limited to 20 people.
Yes.
What about you, Luke?
Well, I'd ask them to reflect on what do they think they do really well.
Yeah.
What's the thing you bring that lights you up? And everyone's got that. You know, in Australia, we're incredibly uncomfortable with that. You know, celebrating what we do well. So I love that uncomfortableness, and then you can, you know, around that circle, you'd be, hey, have you seen that behaviour in Mel? Have you seen that she's this incredibly charming, articulate, smart person? We want to see more of that in your environment. So I've summed Mel up, haven't I, in 10 seconds? But how do you feel good straight away, don't you? And we want to see more of that. We want to be, and then everyone's got, you know, when you ask people then, hey, what do you want to work on? They can tell you 12 things that they dislike about themselves. And you get lost in that. The research says if you focus on one area for growth, it affects everything else. So it would be celebrate. The 80% is a celebration. Double down on what you're doing really well. And maybe you might want to work on one thing. It doesn't cost a lot. Get that collaboration going amongst a group of 20 people, and you might have some positive effect.
Great, thanks, Luke. I mean, I think just to sum all of that up in a couple of words, we're certainly hearing practical over theory. So how do we get more practical? How do we get more relatable and build connection and motivate? So how do we build that into how we develop leaders? And certainly I think the other theme that we're hearing a lot here is just around reach. Like, how is this not about top leaders, but how is it more around communities of practice, or getting in and through organisations and uncovering great leaders and great leadership practices through organisations. So thank you very much, Drew. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Mel.
Well done. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Luke. I guess what occurred to me as I was listening there was just how it's really hard to do justice to such a topic in the time that we had. There were so many terrific things covered there. One of the things I didn't share, and actually I'm really pleased I didn't, because it actually sort of mapped perfectly. I was just listing down all the things I heard from Drew, Luke, and Mel there. You know, in our mind was going, how do we make sure that those type of ideas that I've just flicked up there, this idea of scale, speed of development and socialisation, the fact that developing people it's a contact sport with other people, and we learn through and with other people. How do we infuse more of those through the leadership strategies that we have? And I heard all of them come out there. You know, I heard this sort of idea that leadership's about all, it's not positional, that we've made leadership a bit complex. And if anyone's sort of done any work with the Drew Dudley stuff, it's about how do we just notice everyday things that happen, this lollipop moment, if anyone's seen that type of stuff. How do we just make it more accessible? How do we make it fun? I heard a bit of that as well. And how do we make experiential? I heard that too. I love the point that Darcy made at the end, just around this idea of reflection. You know, if you wanted to do something at zero cost and that people would really enjoy, get people to connect and engage in reflective practice. And your point is around on the positive stuff. We don't do that well. I have very few leaders that I work with who, as senior leaders and teams, do that as a practice. And I always ask leaders, hey, tell us what you do personally. Yeah, I do a few things. What do we do as a group? No, nothing. So there are so many things that hit the points that we've got up here. So we've only got a few minutes to go. What I'd like to do is just give you the chance to just have a bit of a chat with the people next to you. Now, we've got a couple of questions that you might want to reflect on, and what we would love for you to do before you leave is to answer these questions in Menti, because we want to use them to create a white paper that's based on the research that went into today, as well as the views in the room. So there's two simple questions we'd love to be part of, essentially 100 professionals in the leadership development space that we then input into this. And the ideas will be about what can we do that's simple, scalable, that's socialised and cost effective in the way that we develop leadership. And the second one is what assumptions might we have as leaders, or as leadership development professionals in the way we go about our work? We heard some of them there. One of them is, does it need to be top down, or is leadership positional? There's lots been written on that. Most people in here would probably have a view that it's not, but how is that assumption getting in the way of the work we do? Another one that comes to mind is, are we experimenting enough? with leadership development. It's a topic we want to get right, and we want to curate it and make it feel really good. But I would ask, are we experimenting enough? So they'd be the sort of assumptions we'd love to get you to muse on. So just finally, a round of applause for Luke, Drew and Mel. Thank you all. And I might just give you now just 5 or so minutes just to check in with your group and have a quick chat on your reflections. And if you get a chance, we'd love you to answer those questions that we will then share through a white paper, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that as well. So I'll give you 5 or 10 minutes, folks, and then I'll close in a few minutes. Thank you. Hello. Thank you, everyone. I know we're at time now, so I just wanted to firstly thank everyone for coming. I know it's no mean feat to be able to make it into the city on a Tuesday morning, and I know some people have travelled from close and afar. So thank you so much for coming along, taking part today. As I said, I was really conscious as I was listening that we could have spent another hour or two listening to that panel and exploring it more as a group. We would love it if you can take some time to share some of the conversation you just had and some of your reflections through scanning the QR code, not the one on the sheet that we handed out there. That's actually the digital show bag where you can access all of the content that we've shared today. We'll make sure that you can get that, so you can take that along and access that digital show bag. But if you scan the QR code that's on screen now, it would be great to get your input into our white paper that we will produce based on the research leading into today and based on your views on those 2 questions. We'd love to be able to share within that some of the simple things that can be done to really address some of the key topics we talked about today around making leadership development more impactful. From me and the team, thank you so much for coming along. Have a great day. If you want to hang around and have a coffee, I'm not sure how much coffee's left, but I can see some breakfast still there. But if you want to hang around and chat to people in and around the room, we'd love you to do that. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the day.